For over 2,000 years, the name Xanthippe has been synonymous with the nagging, ill-tempered wife, the ultimate archetypal shrew of history. She is often remembered not for her own life or character, but merely as a difficult foil to her husband's legendary, saintly patience. But was she truly the domestic monster that traditional history portrays, or was she a woman caught in exceptionally difficult circumstances? Today, we dive into the deep academic debate to peel back the layers of caricature and reveal the real human woman beneath the myth. We will analyze contemporary accounts, economic realities, and the gendered lenses through which her life has been viewed by subsequent generations. To understand Xanthippe, we must first understand the social world she inhabited. The Golden Age of Athens, a period of immense cultural flourishing. This era was a time of great art and philosophy, but it also imposed significant legal and social restrictions on all free women. Her name itself, Xanthippe, carries significant weight. In ancient Greek, xanthos means yellow or blonde, while hippos translates directly to horse. Names containing the word horse were typically reserved for aristocratic families wealthy enough to maintain and breed these high-status animals in Athens. This aristocratic background likely provided her with an education and a spirited nature that made her a formidable match for a man like Socrates. When they married, Socrates was approximately 30 years her senior, which was actually quite common within the traditional structures of Athenian marriage. Together, they had 3 sons. However, their domestic life was destined to be far from peaceful or prosperous due to Socrates' chosen lifestyle. Socrates was famously trained as a stonemason, a respectable trade that could have provided a stable and comfortable income for his growing family. Instead, he chose to neglect his trade and wander the streets of Athens, debating philosophy for free and refusing any form of payment. As a result, the entire burden of managing the household and feeding 3 young children fell squarely and unfairly on Xanthippe's shoulders alone. While Socrates pursued abstract truth and intellectual virtue, Xanthippe was forced to deal with the harsh, cold reality of poverty and survival. So, how did the image of the harridan emerge? Interestingly, it was not as prominent in the accounts of those who knew her best. In Plato's Phaedo, the only dialogue where she is actually named, Xanthippe is portrayed with a level of genuine human dignity and respect. She is shown visiting Socrates in prison on the very day of his execution, crying out in deep grief for the husband she is losing. In this moment, she represents the painful emotional reality of human loss that the philosophers in the room are desperately trying to transcend. However, it is in the writings of Xenophon, another contemporary, where we first begin to see the seeds of her difficult and harsh reputation. In Xenophon's Symposium, he records a specific conversation where Xanthippe is explicitly described as the hardest to get along with of all women. Socrates famously responded by comparing her to a high-mettled horse, stating that if he could endure her, he could endure any human being. By enduring the domestic storm of Xanthippe, Socrates claimed to be practicing the ultimate philosophical skill of stoic equanimity and patience. By the time of later writers like Diogenes Laertius, the stories became cartoonish, including the famous but likely false legend of the chamber pot. After she supposedly dumped a pot of water on him, Socrates calmly remarked that he always knew that after thunder, the rain would surely follow. Most modern scholars consider these colorful tales to be apocryphal, literary tropes designed solely to highlight Socrates' supposedly perfect philosophical virtue. Modern scholarship has begun to shift the focus from her alleged temper to the systemic failures of Socrates himself as a husband and father. In his influential 1960 essay, Robert Graves argued that Xanthippe was not a shrew, but essentially the necessary voice of human reality. While Socrates pursued abstract and eternal reason, Xanthippe was forced by circumstance to be reasonable about the daily necessities of life. Scholars argue that the shrew label was a convenient tool for male philosophers to dismiss and belittle the importance of the domestic sphere. By painting her as irrational, they could further elevate Socrates' intellectual detachment as the ultimate and most desirable of masculine virtues. Socrates' deliberate refusal to charge for his teaching was a point of extreme domestic, psychological, and financial stress for his wife and children. Her supposed shrewishness was likely a very rational and desperate response to a husband who consistently neglected his most basic paternal duties. Some modern analyses suggest that their marriage was a dialectic of its own, a constant sparring partnership between two intelligent and strong-willed individuals. It is possible that Socrates sought out a wife with a questioning spirit similar to his own, leading to a home of constant debate. Xanthippe performed the difficult, unseen labor that fundamentally allowed the Socratic method and his way of life to exist in the first place. She worked to maintain the physical world that her husband famously and deliberately chose to ignore in favor of the abstract and eternal. There is a biting paradox here. The world's greatest teacher, according to his peers, could not, or perhaps would not, teach his own wife. Her negative reputation became so entrenched that it influenced literature for centuries, serving as a benchmark for unpleasantness in Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. Her name was even assigned to a species of African shrew, forever linking her historical identity to a small, irritable and aggressive animal. Today we are finally working to clear the heavy dust of historical bias and patriarchal narrative to see the real, complex Xanthippe. What was once dismissed as mere nagging is now more accurately seen as a desperate cry for help from a woman in poverty. She lived with a husband who was increasingly distant, guided by an inner daimon or voice that she simply could not hear. In the final calculation, Socrates chose his philosophy and his own death over his domestic duties and the welfare of his family. Xanthippe's true legacy is actually one of immense strength, the strength required to hold a family together in the shadow of a giant. This shift reflects a much broader and necessary movement to re-evaluate the women who stood behind the famous great men of history. Behind every life of abstract and lofty reason was someone ensuring the practical and daily continuity of human life itself. So we return to our original and provocative question. Was Xanthippe truly an acchio, a term meaning a bad or difficult wife? The label acchio is a simple and perhaps reductive answer to what was a deeply complex and very human struggle. If she was seen as difficult, it was likely because she was a grounded realist married to a purely abstract idealist. She dealt with the hunger of their 3 children, while he dealt only with his own insatiable hunger for truth. To dismiss her simply as a shrew is to completely miss the deeply human and tragic story of a marriage in conflict. Today, we can finally appreciate her not as an obstacle to philosophy, but as its very necessary and vital ground. History is written by those who debate. However, the continuity of life is maintained by those who endure and provide. The echoes of their philosophical debates still ring today, but the silence of her labor and sacrifice speaks just as loudly. Perhaps the greatest lesson of their difficult marriage is the eternal need to bridge the gap between lofty theory and reality. Xanthippe is finally and rightfully stepping out from the long shadows of Socrates into her own deserved light and recognition. Thank you for joining me on this scholarly journey into the life of one of history's most profoundly misunderstood women. I am Dr. James, and I sincerely hope this exploration has broadened your perspective on the complexities of the classical world. Stay connected with the conversation by using hashtags like Socrates, Xanthippe, and ancient Greece. And don't forget philosophy, history, and academic documentary to find more content like this. For further research, look for Xanthippe Historical Accuracy, Socrates Family Life, and Athenian Women History. Also check Academic Debate on Xanthippe, Plato versus Xenophon, and Robert Graves' Xanthippe Essay. For inquiries and academic collaborations, please reach out to Jongmoon Co., also known as James Co. You can contact me directly at the email address k90391198@gmail.com. I am also the author of acclaimed works such as Adam Smith and Picasso, The Final Game Between the US and China, and The One Decision Structure That Changes My Future, as well as The Decisive Principle for Controlling My Fear. I've also authored Plato and Picasso, and What to Leave After Ashoka's Conquest. Remember, our goal is knowledge and wisdom. I am Dr. James, Jongmoon Co. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeking the truth. Thank you for watching.